The first session is about finding your health line, the true key to success, by Shoma Chaudhary, host of Inquiry and former managing editor and co-founder Tehelka. In 2011, Newsweek picked her as one of the 150 power women who shake the world. She has been awarded the prestigious Ernest Hemingway Award for political journalism.
Hi, I'm Shoma Chaudhary. Thank you very much for inviting me for this conference. I'm delighted to be a part of it, and I thank Mr. Mariwala and Archana for inviting me. I was a little hesitant in the beginning to accept this invitation because what I want to speak about might sound a bit esoteric for a conference meant for entrepreneurs driven by ambition and a desire for success. But at the same time, what I want to speak about actually is the true key to success that we don't often speak about. And what is that true key? For me, the true key is to find your health line, a health line for your company and for yourself. Now, that might seem like a very, like an ancillary pursuit for a company that's trying to build itself. So we must ask ourselves, why should one have a health line in the first place? It's a good time to speak about it because if there's one thing this pandemic has shown us, is that health is the most crucial factor in all our lives. In fact, even economies are a subset of health rather than the other way around. So when I speak of a health line, at the most obvious level, I'm speaking about physical and emotional well-being, emotional and physical health. Arianna Huffington, who's a very well-known media baron and now owns a company called Thrive Global, has built a multi-million-dollar company on this idea of mental well-being and emotional well-being of employees. And it began with herself literally collapsing on the ground with exhaustion and sleeplessness and, just overwork. And she broke her cheekbone. That was a wake-up call for her. So today she's advising companies of every size, from Fortune 500 companies to the smallest companies about not only becoming aware and sensitive, but designing their companies to include the well-being of their employees as a factor of success, as a description of success of their companies. And people are buying into that. And I'll just throw one statistic at you, which will make this more sort of vivid and real. There are surveys in India which say that 42.5% of those who work in the private sector, and that cuts across the ladder from top leadership to the bottom, suffer from depression, some level of fatigue, hopelessness, helplessness, anger, in sense of low self-esteem, a sense of being a cog in the machine. So that actually leads to unproductivity. And the point is that one has to ask oneself that do you want to run a company which leeches the whole life joy out of living? Because that is inevitably going to lead to unproductivity. So you might be a very profitable company, but if your entire ecosystem does not experience a sense of well-being, then what is that worth? So that, as I said, is at the obvious level. But the other way of examining a health line for your company and yourself is actually to look at health lines as business practice. In every dimension, it's social, ethical, emotional, physical, and environmental dimension. You have to ask yourself that, am I following, at my very core of the company, am I following a health line? And to do that, first of all, one has to have the courage to define growth for oneself. As an entrepreneur, the absolute core idea is that you have to chase growth, an eternal idea of growth. How big can you grow? How fast can you grow big? How exponential is your returns? And yet the thing to do is, and to have a sustainable, large company, to actually even experience conventional success, the thing to do at your very inception and at your middle levels, and then when you're at the pinnacle of success, is to keep asking yourself that what is my natural state of growth? And it's important to remind oneself that there's only one thing that grows unsustainably, which grows, at the cost of everything else, which will harm others in its path, and that is cancer. And so, when you look around us, today we're seeing the impact of people, conventional ideas of growth, leadership, that has not defined for itself what is natural state of growth. So our planet is in a mess. Whether you believe in climate change or not, it is being shown to us from America to Australia to the Amazon. Things are on fire. water runs out, we can't breathe the air around us, whether in Delhi or Bombay or Bangalore. It's becoming real that what unsustainable growth will leave in its path. You have high depression, you have high pollution, you have climate change, you have children who are stressed, you have yourselves who are stressed. One has to have that courage to ask, what is a natural state of growth? Right now, around us, there are so many examples of entrepreneurs, leaders in every profession, it's regardless of where your business lies, who are overreaching, who are not understanding that natural state of growth and are tipping over in different ways. The media is a good example right now who've completely moved away from an idea of natural state of growth. In your hunt for TRPs, for high profit, we are willing to cut corners, willing to fix TRPs, to forget the very basics of journalism, to put out fake news, not report on hate, but incite hate, to be a judge, to not provide evidence when you're accusing others. And all of that is leading to something which is short-termism. You might be the most profitable company, but there's a short-termism, there's evil you're leaving behind you in society, there are others you're damaging. And I said the only metaphor for that is cancer. Very recently, two entrepreneurs, very successful corporates, Rajiv Bajaj of Bajaj Auto and Paleji, put out a statement that they will not advertise with 3 channels that spread toxicity. Now they have articulated their ethical line. In conventional terms, this may hurt them because these may be the channels with the furthest reach, the most profitable channels, but they have defined for themselves that this is our ethical health line. We will not participate in something which spreads toxicity. And I think that eventually that will create for themselves and their ecosystem and those who work with them a sense of pride and a sense of health. There are many other leaders around us who are very vividly have not lived by this idea of a health line and not understood their natural state of health and have tipped over. And I'll name some of the well-known examples, whether it's Chanda Kochar or Vijay Mallya or WeWork or Ramalingam Raju. All of these are people who had great skills, great entrepreneurship, great risk-taking ability, but because they did not look at that health line personally and for their company, because they did not understand their natural state of growth, they fell over into that state of unsustainable or unethical growth. I'd like to share 2 very small examples from my own life, both at a personal level and at a professional level. At a personal level, we've been very fortunate, my husband and I, to possess a patch of land which is absolutely beautifully located, in the midst of nature. And we're running it as a boutique homestay. When we found that patch of land, it was barren. We've spent 11 years growing trees. It's full of birds and butterflies, and it's absolutely stunning. Now we're running it as a boutique homestay, and it's doing well. Immediately, the conventional idea of growth would be, let's build some more on this patch. Let's expand the number of rooms. Let's, increase the amount of profit that one can make from this particular enterprise. But we have identified our health line. We know for ourselves that we will not build on this land in any way which will make it less beautiful than we found it, or which will take away from its core sense of beauty and pleasure that it is transmitting. So regardless, we have understood what the natural state of growth of this enterprise can be, and we will not violate that. So that's at a personal level, and it's serving us well, because that's when you will consistently have return people coming, for that experience that you can sustainably give to someone. At a professional level, I've been a journalist all my life. I started out with Outlook and Pioneer and India Today, and then I was part of the founding team of Tehelka. I was the managing editor there, and also had ancillary other companies through which one did events, curated conferences. There have been 2 points in my life, at very difficult points in my life. Once, while being a professional at Tehelka, I know that my colleague who owned the company was offered a large sum of money if we would change the ethos of Tehelka a little bit. And at a very difficult time, at a time when one needed money, he refused. And that actually kept, as long as Tehelka was alive, it kept its reputation for journalism intact. The journalists who worked there worked with pride, and the core professionalism of that company is something that I wear with pride even today, regardless of what's happened afterwards. Subsequent to that, I've tried to create companies of my own. And at, again, a very crucial juncture when I needed money, I've been asked to change my ethos. Again, one's ideology, one's commitment to the constitutional values that I think underpin journalism. And that, for that, a large sum of investment would be available for me. And I have turned away at great cost to myself, it seemed at that time, in the short term. But I told myself that if I have to be a journalist, there's certain things that I will not do. And if I want to make more profit than is possible within journalism, then I should, get into entrepreneurship of a different kind. I can sell products, I can sell shoes, I can sell anything where the profit margins may be higher. And it was very heartening recently when I spoke to Anant Goenka on a show that I do called Inquiry, and he's the proprietor of the Indian Express Group. And he spoke of the same thing. Indian Express commands a high degree of respect. And he said there's a natural growth that we've understood within which we can be profitable, we can give back to our shareholders, but that is the only sort of profitability that journalism can afford before you become something else. And that's what I mean, that you take that decision and you live with happiness and you live with pride. So the questions as entrepreneurs that I would suggest we build into, and as I said, you design into your company, is this, that do you leave your environment more polluted than you found it? Do you leave your employees feeling more exploited and more burnt out than you found them? Do you leave your entire ecosystem, everyone around you, your stakeholders, your supply chains, everyone who's associated with you, do they have a sense of growth, or do you only have a sense of growth? And the courageous point in this is that increasingly, once one has defined one's health point, one will have to articulate that and state it, that these are parameters of health, these are parameters of success. When we are analyzing the success and performance of our company, we include how our employees are feeling, how our ecosystem is feeling, how our environment around our business is feeling. And that is our parameters of success. When you state that to your shareholders and your investors, some will fall away, but some will stay. And that then is the ecosystem within which your business can sustain and grow and feel healthy for you every night when you fall asleep. The more people who have the courage to define this, the more behavior change will happen. Success will be redefined. And that's, I think, the critical thing that is needed today. While I say this, I don't want to sound like, something that is sort of liberal, bleeding heart, someone that's just asking for an ideal that's not possible. And so I want to reiterate that I'm not making a trade-off between integrity and success. I'm saying that success can be redefined, intrinsically absorb an idea of a health line. And there are great examples of that, not of those who walked away from success, but those who've created extremely successful empires based on that. A good example is Howard Schultz of Starbucks. He was 7 years old when he saw his father, who was a delivery man for customer goods. I think it was for diapers and for health items. He was trying to rush somewhere and he fell on thin ice and broke his hip and his thigh. And he was laid off without any healthcare, without any benefits. He was immediately cut off because he was not a permanent worker. And Howard Schultz saw what that did to his father. When he built Starbucks, he worked that idea of health benefits, that idea of well-being for his employees into the core idea of success for his company. And he did that at a time, as I said, at a foundational level and through times when he was going through difficult times, when Starbucks was going through difficult times, when investors were demanding a lot from him, he held the line. Even in the 1980s, when he was going through a tumultuous time, he held the line. He said, this is intrinsic to the profitability of this company. It's intrinsic to my quarterly growth and my expectation of growth, that my employees' well-being is intrinsic to my idea of success. And it's a stated position. And the beauty is that because he said it's his core strategy, he's built a company, they've overcome their hard times, they've overcome the natural up and down roller coaster ride of entrepreneurship, but he's built a company that is sustainable. And so, to end with, I'd like to come back to the idea of health. And I'm not sure how many are familiar with this concept of homeostasis. All of us, and as I said, the pandemic reminds us of the idea of health, both at a level of metaphor, at a level of the planet, at the level of us individually, and at the level of economy. And so there's this concept of homeostasis. Within our bodies, there's an invisible process that we are blind to at all times, which is actually making our business function. It's making the interlinked ecosystem function. It holds our blood pressure at the level it should, our fluid balance, our blood temperature. So all our organs might be functioning fantastically. Our heart is pumping, our mind is working, our brain is ticking away. But there's an invisible process that is holding all of that together. And that invisible process is called homeostasis. When homeostasis breaks, there's a cascading disaster. A well-functioning heart, a well-functioning brain, a well-functioning kidney will still not be profitable to you as a human being. When homeostasis breaks, the body falls apart. And so the health line that I'm talking about is the homeostasis of a business. We identify that for ourselves personally and for our company and for our environment and for society, for our ecosystem. That idea for health line will hold the homeostasis of our entrepreneurship together. And that is where success lies. So I'd like to end again with that idea that if we do not identify health lines ethically, socially, emotionally, mentally, physically, and financially, then there is what we have experienced, ill health at a massive scale, at a pandemic level of scale. And that's the idea I'd like to leave you with, that what is that moral compass, ethical, social, financial, dimensional idea of a health line? Identify that for yourself and your company. Thank you.